Okay, welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about music documentaries. I'm David Lizabram here with my co-host,
Andrew Keats.
and we have a very special guest today, James Campion, who has written a book called "Take a Sad Song: The Emotional Currency of Hey Jude." It's a book all about the song "Hey Jude." You may have heard this song. It's kind of a nugget, deep cut.
It's a song all about "Let It Be."
Yeah, it's all about
oddly titled, but you know, you like the Beatles, you'll like it. Don't worry.
James, say hi.
David, Andrew, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I really do.
Yeah.
Great.
So we'll get into some get back stuff, which if you've listened to our podcast, we talk about endlessly, and this will be no exception. Let's just kind of jump into you. How did you become a music writer? Like, you seem to be putting out a whole lot of music related content.
Oh, wow. That is a big first one right out of the box. I studied journalism in school, wrote for school newspapers all the way through middle school, high school, college. I did the usual stuff, writing obituaries and sports update columns features for the Trentonian, Asbury Park Press. And then got out of it for a while, and then got back into it in the mid to late 80s, and then started writing specifically general journalism, like I said, sports and other things like that. But when I wrote my very first book, Deep Tank Jersey, which is a story about a band that just plays covers around the Jersey Shore and in New Jersey. So I don't know where you guys are originated from, but here there's like you could make a ton of cash and become, I kind of guess, quasi-famous by just playing what I call the human jukebox. Here in Jersey, there's plenty of places to play. And so during the writing of that, I got hired by the Aquarian Weekly, which is now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I've been working with them since 1997, mainly doing features, cover features, writing about, rock stars or filmmakers, songwriters, things like that. And during that time, I spent more time writing longer features on music. And it's an interesting question, actually, you're asking me, because one of the inspirations for writing this book, a book about one song, was a piece I wrote for something called the Dog Door Cultural a couple of years ago, which is now the Pittsburgher. And it was sort of an arts online zine. And I was sort of their legacy writer. So I did this piece on Over the Rainbow, which I think is the greatest song ever written. It's my favorite song. And
I've heard of that one too. Harold Arlen.
It's sort of a deep cut, as you say. And while working on that, it's about a 5,000 word piece. By working on that, I realized that there were so many different aspects of the song beyond what we know about it. And I thought, what if I picked one song from a pop artist as opposed to one that's in a film? And although that was a very popular song for its time. And then I started reading all the books it turns out I'm like the 8th or 9th author to write about one song. So I read everybody else's books and I thought, let's see how they did it. And I gave it a shot. And Take a Sad Song, the emotional currency of Hey Jude, is the final product of that.
Yeah. So I'll let Andy jump in, but I am kind of curious about what you said about how in New Jersey there's still this kind of culture, because we're both in California. I grew up out here. Andy is from Baltimore, and a fellow journalist as well. But I grew up as a big Springsteen fan, so you'd hear about the kind of Asbury Park or Jersey Shore scene. But it's interesting to hear that that's still kind of a thing, because here in California at least, there are cover bands for specific bands, and a few of them do well. But generally speaking, the days of when you could just make money as a musician, and play whatever rock songs, human jukebox type stuff, it's tough sell. And it's kind of interesting. Why do you think that is still a thriving scene in that one kind of area?
Well, it has devolved over the years because a lot of things have changed. And my book is almost like a history book now, because people are very, very well aware of drinking and driving, certainly about people, exhibiting certain things on stages, the behavioral concept of what I call in the book Clubland. So things have mellowed greatly over the last decade since that book came out in 96. I wrote it in 95. But I think the one thing that has continued to thrive here in New Jersey, but I think in the United States, and certainly I've been to Dublin and London and the same thing in the pubs, people just love live music. And I'm finding now since the pandemic, which was another motivation of me writing this book because I was home all the time. I told my publisher, remember that idea I had back in 2019? I'm doing it now. It's just that people just love live music. They want to be in a room with people creating music and interacting with them and having a drink or two with their friends and dancing and meeting members of the whatever sex they're interested in and, just letting loose on a Friday and Saturday night. So I feel as long as human beings want to do that, I think live music will always be a great, as opposed to say a DJ, or unless you go to a dance club or a jukebox. I think there's something about a band out there leading the charge, and a lot of the bands in my book were very, they were very fun. I'll leave it at that. They were very fun. So it was nice to be in a room with them. They were sort of band leaders, no pun intended, and to get everybody crazy. And I think that again is something you don't get from a jukebox or a DJ per se.
I'll give a shout out to my favorite South Jersey based cover band, Splintered Sunlight. Fantastic Grateful Dead cover band. Plays out of Philly and does a lot of shows in Atlantic City and Ocean City, Maryland, or Ocean City, Jersey, Delaware, that whole area. So
yeah. Cover bands are huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
So I got a question for you on Hey Jude. The beginning of Get Back, where they sort of rip through in 7 minutes of narration the entirety of the Beatles' career, gives us this voice of God scene setting where they say they hadn't played live for many years. Then they did this in the round recording for Hey Jude, and it so invigorated them that it set the stage for their Twickenham sessions. Given what all the work you've done on Hey Jude, how true is that? How tidy is that narrative versus the reality? How did they come to put that live performance together? And do was it, by your recollection, as transformative as Peter Jackson suggests?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, Andrew, you can't put enough. I had a huge smile on my face. The book was due in April of 2020, so I wasn't able to comment really. I did lend a paragraph or two to talk about how, this film was a coming, and everybody thought it was going to be a revisionist history of sort of the end of the Beatles. And, I was with like everybody else, bated breath, watching it on Disney Plus. And when that opening thing happened, and then they started playing Hey Jude, specifically the na-na part, and he put a great emphasis on their performing that video, where they performed that video, and how they performed that video, and whom worked on that video was all part of what the Get Back sessions turned out to be. Number one, I interviewed Michael Lindsay Hogg, who, as you know, was the original director of Let It Be, which was the original Get Back sessions. Michael becomes a star of the show in many ways. My heart went out to him. Michael and I were emailing during the time when he was trying to be coy and not tell me too much about it, but explain that he kind of comes off as someone who's a little bit pushy. But I felt such sympathy for him because, the Beatles had plan A, and then he started to shoot it. Then they had plan B, and he tried to shoot that. Then he had C. And my favorite line in the whole film from him was when he's like, I really don't know what film I'm making anymore. It's so defeated, but just again, to answer your question, Andrew, it's the most important thing. 3 things happened during Hey Jude. What you're talking about is the live, great description in the round version that the Beatles shot at Twickenham, directed by Michael Lindsay Hogg. And Michael recounts the story in my book, but since you guys are the rock docs, guys, I will, go ahead and bury the lead here, still wishing that people go out and get the book. But that's my favorite chapter when he talks about the making of that film. He sat down with Paul and he said, Paul, nobody wants to hear you guys sing Na 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 for 4.5 minutes. You're the Beatles. I love you, but seriously. So Paul's like, what is your suggestion? And he said, why don't we have the world sing it? And when he said that, I got a little chills there because that film, that video where they have all these people from different races and different backgrounds, different area, generations. And when they hit the na-nas and they come out of nowhere, you can't quite see them yet. It's close up on Paul, close up on, George and John, and of course, Ringo. And then they all come pouring out. And it's this amazing, amazing moment for them. But it wasn't just that. They brought in, I didn't know this, Michael said that they did 4 or 5 takes of it, and each take they brought in a new audience. So the Beatles would watch this audience come in, and they just started to vamp. They started playing like Little Richard tunes and Buddy Holly. He told me all the songs they played, and then he said they even played a live version or 2 of Hey Jude, and were teaching the people the part, and people were just loving it, and they were loving it. And they could feel, which they hadn't done in 2 years, what it was like to be in a room and play music together, and what it was like to have an audience respond to that music, something they missed. So that was the impetus of doing a show, which poor Michael Lindsay Hogg had to try to get him to do, which ends up on the roof at the end of Get Back or Let It Be. And also the fact that there was a joy in making Hey Jude, not only the video, but the song itself, where, as you know, where the Beatles were in 68, they were bogged down by the White Album. There was a lot of infighting. John had found Yoko, Paul had just found Linda, and Ringo leaves the sessions, and they get together to do this song just for a single, and then they do this video with all these people, and, Peter Jackson got it right. This was the thing that started it. And that's why they wanted to do that. That, and also, guys, have you ever seen the footage of them rehearsing Hey Jude? It's on YouTube.
No.
Have you guys? Okay, check it out after this. Everybody listening to this, check it out. It's great. It was done by the BBC. It was a special, and maybe I might be getting it wrong, but it was done by a private film company, I think shown on the BBC. It was the Beatles rehearsing a song. And Paul saw the footage of that and thought, what a great idea. Us putting together a song. We should do us putting together a whole album. And all those things were all Hey Jude related, and they all led to Get Back. No question.
It's a very funny story you tell there because, one of David and my reaction when we watched Get Back was how endlessly difficult they make their task for themselves over the course of planning a concert, which
so
is
true.
And otherwise straightforward concept that they and many other bands have successfully engineered many times over. And so it's interesting to hear that just a few months earlier, they were able to more or less spontaneously put together a concert, throw in some covers, throw in some old tunes, play Hey Jude a couple times, all the stuff that for whatever reason they resist throughout the Twickenham sessions about, this doesn't have to be the world's most complicated thing. We can play some old songs. If we don't have enough new material to make a concert go off, what if we wouldn't be the first band in the world who had the idea of playing our old material as well as some new material for an audience,
including the Beatles. Sure.
Including the Beatles, right?
Yeah.
And so it's funny that it had just come naturally to them, and maybe makes me remember a little bit more how basically interested they were in setting up barriers that they could overcome, basically.
Yeah, and they were definitely 4 disparate characters. I often quote Mick Jagger's 4-headed monster quote about them in the 60s, and they were the 4-headed monster, but by 68, they had splintered a bit. You had the Maharishi, George was very deeply into spirituality, Ringo was doing films. He was about to go off to do a film, which is why I think they chose Twickenham, because that's where they were going to shoot The Magic Christian. And Paul and John were doing their things. So they were a different band in a sense, even a couple of months later. And I would also say that Hey Jude came in fully formed. Paul wrote the whole thing in about a day and played it for John, who adored it until the day he died. And this was John, who was never very overly, complimentary of anything. Said that was the best song Paul had ever written, and he loved the lyrics to it. And so it was fully formed, came in, and they were under the guise of George Martin. And when they got in with Michael Lindsay Hall, they just listened to what he had to say and went. I think, it seemed to me that Get Back was really a Beatles production. And Michael told me it was like hanging on to the tail of a tiger. I mean, you had to roll with the punches there. So that's an excellent observation, because it's amazing how many different Beatle eras there are and how disparate each one is. The difference between August to the fall of 68, the writing in June, the rehearsing in July, the recording in very late July, early August of Hey Jude, the release of Hey Jude in August, the recordings, the film, and then all the way through to January of 1969 is like another complete era. And it's so funny. The Beatles were just different people then. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's, the famous origin story about Hey Jude, which is that, Jude, of course, is Julian, John's son. He was in the process of breaking up with Julian's mom, Cynthia, his wife, his first wife, leaving, for Yoko, basically leaving the family. He never had, he had a famously not somewhat distant relationship with Julian. And Paul takes time out of his busy schedule to, hop in a car and drive over to comfort Cynthia and Julian, who were just two, a young kid and this woman that he'd known as John's wife for these years. I never really was able to figure out what they all thought about it. John and Cynthia are gone. But based on your research, what do you think, Cynthia thought of this song and Julian, has spoken about it? What in the moment, was it comforting? Was it helpful? Did it mean what Paul intended? Or was it just a matter of Paul drawing from an emotional experience that he was going through and turning it into art, which was great for him and great for the world, but in the micro situation may or may not have really had that much of an impact on the people he was writing about?
That's a great question, David. And that's the question that I asked. And it's a question that keeps coming up throughout the book. And it's one I think I answer as best I could because it's all out there. It's funny when you watch a television show or a series or something and, it's over and then you kind of exhale and then you think back and you're like, oh yeah, that's right. Way back in season 1, it made sense that happened here in season 5 or 8 or whatever. And that's the way life works too. Sometimes it happens in jagged ways, but sometimes it's a straight line. I've found that there was a very straight line. Specifically, you mentioned about Paul going to comfort Cynthia and especially Julian in late June 1968, because Paul loved Julian because Julian was him. He was losing his dad. Paul lost his mom when he was 14, but he knew that John lost his dad, who left him when he was also 5 or 6, or however old Julian was. So that's number one. Number two, Paul and John's relationship and how tight they were because they both lost their mothers as teenagers and how much music got them over that. I think it was Howard Soanes, his biographer, one of his many biographers, Paul's biographers that I interviewed for the book, who said, when Paul goes for the music metaphor, he's not screwing around anymore. When he says take a sad song, he's using song instead of divorce or pain or loss. Because Paul is song. He is music. That's why I titled one of my chapters, Man as Song. And finally, I think the second part of your question is, yes, Cynthia writes in A Twist of Lennon, her first memoir, so it was a little closer to her true memory, how much she totally appreciated, not only coming from Paul, who, by the way, she knew she met John maybe 10 days after John met Paul. So there wasn't a time that Paul really knew John much, unless Cynthia was involved. So in essence, he's kind of saying goodbye to his childhood. And he's also comforting this kid who he always was close to, just like he loved kids. He loved Heather, Linda's stepdaughter, and he loved his dad, James's stepdaughter. And he just loved kids, and he loved Julian. And I think Julian totally appreciated it. Even years later, he said, I don't have any photos of my dad and me playing, but I got a ton of me and Uncle Paul. Paul's never, ever forgotten a birthday or a Christmas card for Julian. But at the time, Cynthia was totally moved because she was going to get ostracized. John was the unquestioned from day one, even though Paul kind of took over the direction of the band after the death of Brian Epstein and a lot of the drug abuse that John went through in 1967. This was always John's band. You could see in the Get Back film how deferred they are. Paul knows if he could get John into a song, if he could get John into the jam, he could get the Beatles up and running again. So he knew what that, what John could do to completely ostracize Cynthia and Julian, and Paul would not have it. This is a guy who felt, you know, empathy and sympathy like no other rock star. I can't even imagine. I think it was Rob Sheffield from Rolling Stone in my book who says, can you imagine any other rock star of any era, Eric Clapton, Mick Jagger, just name any of them, who would get in their fancy Aston Martin and drive an hour out to comfort the ex-wife? I mean, people were dumping their wives and girlfriends left and right, including Paul, who was just getting rid of Jane Asher, who he was, living with and engaged to. So there's something there. And I think in my book, I answer it because there is a lineage. There's a thread there that can't be broken, and it's in the song.
I've always been fascinated by John's relationship to the song, because, as you say, how hard it is to imagine any other rock star driving an hour out to go comfort their bandmate's family. I also, despite knowing this the basic shape of this story for years, it's always struck me as really odd to imagine John's relationship to this song and singing it in front of an audience, that it's a Paul song about John's family. Had he ever expressed any sort of discomfort with, I mean, it's one thing to bare your own soul. It's quite different for somebody else to bare your soul, And
Sure.
so does John have a complicated relationship with this song?
Yeah, it's funny you ask that because, you think of songs like You're So Vain or You Ought to Know, or, these songs that women write about men all too well. That one that just eclipsed Hey Jude for the longest running number one, that 10 minutes, the Taylor Swift song. There's plenty of songs, men too, writing about, past loves or being jilted. So this is kind of like, Warren Beatty being in a band with Carly Simon and she's singing about him. But the funny thing about it, Andrew, is that this is a true story Paul's told a million times, and John reiterated it in 1980 before he died. The second Paul played him this song, John said, this song's about me. It's about me finding Yoko. You have found her. Go and get her. Hey, Jude. Hey, John. This is about me. So John was very buoyed by this. And the reason why I say that is because the Beatles constantly sent messages to each other and to their fans in songs. They just did it. It's what they did. It's why John eventually would write How Do You Sleep to upset Paul, because Paul had thrown in, too many people to upset John. This is what they did. They did this. George actually put words in songs to try to let John and Paul know he's a good songwriter. You should start paying attention to me. So John wasn't that far off. And also, one of the things I discovered in this book, guys, I've said it, I'm going to keep saying over and over again. I hope people read it because I'm not going to do it justice, because I interviewed a psychologist, sociologist, a professor of philosophy, professors of musicology for this book to sort of circle around this song. John and Paul both lose their moms, as I said earlier, as teenagers. They write song after song after song that kind of parallel the idea of losing or not quite finding that female tenderness. Even Paul in his 40s looked back at his 23-year-old self and said, you know what? When I wrote Yesterday, it was why she had to go. I don't know. She wouldn't say. Was about his mom. Was it about it in 1965? Probably not. But there's a subconscious there. I forget what who the person said in my book. And they said Paul's is best when he's mining his subconscious for song. So those two guys lose their moms. They write these songs together, beseeching the love of women, and they both find these independent women, both of them from previous marriages, who are divorced, who are finding their way in a male-dominated world of journalism and photojournalism like Linda, and art, performance art like Yoko. They find these women within about 6 months of each other. They fall in love or consummate these relationships within days of each other, and then they end up getting married to both these women within 7 days of each other. I mean, the parallels are stark. So when John hears this, he says Paul's telling him, you can't mess this up. You got to grab Yoko. Just the way John and Paul wrote, She Loves You. Can't be bad. You got to go get her. Both songs are second-person songs, written one man writing to another man to tell him about a woman. So it was pretty strong in John's heart, this song, regardless of whether I think he even knew at that time that it was written to support Julian.
Yeah, and I wonder if that, you found her, now go and get her. I mean, you kind of discuss this in the book too, but if it's sort of a self-justification because, like you said, Paul was with Jane Asher, they were living together, they were very involved in this, swinging London world of art, music, film, everything else, and then, just when that's, about to be, he's about to get married, he meets and falls in love with Linda, and unceremoniously ditches Jane, and so there could be just a little bit of self-justification, like, well, if I wrote such a beautiful song and the whole world falls in love with it and they're singing na na na, then you found her, now go and get her. I mean, it's a little bit of talking to himself, I think.
Always, always. Every songwriter
there's a lot of codes in there.
Yes, I've interviewed dozens and dozens of songwriters, and they will all tell you the same thing. These songs are about me, or there is something driven from which we all do, from my experiences. And sure, I mean, the thing about Paul and Jane, which is fascinating, is that Jane was a self-made woman, much like Paul's mom, Mary, who was the breadwinner in the family, who was a paragon of womanhood in the 1950s in Liverpool, England. For her to have the power and the gravitas that she had built in her career and her position in the household, and what she meant to those boys, Paul and Michael, his brother. And so Jane reflected a lot of that. But you know what? Here comes Linda, and she's got that maternal instinct. She's already had a child. She is very affectionate, where Jane really wasn't. Jane was very driven by the way Paul was, by her career. And there was constant conflict there. Paul wanted a nice girl to stay home, and Jane wanted to go out and make her own way. And Paul was conflicted, and he wrote songs about that. For No One, We Can Work It Out. There are a ton of them. So he was working that out in his art here. So I think maybe you're right, David. I think there is, and I sort of, and I'm assuming you guys took a peek at the book, that there is a lot of those threads in there too, because Paul also had his journey to get to where the song is composed and eventually handed off to the Beatles and recorded. So, and it is always, it blows my mind that this song was the longest running number one single in America, 9 weeks and 68. It was the song of the year, which no Beatles song had been before in America. And it was number one, I think, in 19 countries or 20. It was insane. It was like the greatest global hit the Beatles ever had. And I will make the argument it is the most personal, gut-wrenching song a songwriter can present in a pop idiom for a band that big. Really. It's really remarkable that they were able to get that kind of level of personal connection to a universal audience. Miraculous, really.
So when Let It Be comes out, I, like a lot of people after Get Back, went and revisited the critical reception to that album, and it's really harsh. But more than being harsh, more specifically, one of the things that comes up a lot is that Let It Be specifically was sort of a cheap imitation, a poor man's version of Hey Jude, and that Paul has fallen into this thing. He thinks this is a formula he can recreate, and he's trying it out again with Let It Be. Do you, just after how closely you've looked at the song, do you see, whether it's sort of a creative pattern he fell into, or some sort of conscious decision, or otherwise, do you see that in Let It Be? And how much do you think the knives were out for Let It Be, just based on what was going on with the band publicly at that time?
Well, yeah, certainly we know historically the knives were out because Paul wanted his solo album, McCartney, to be out, and the Beatles begged him, and he refused, and there was a big battle, and then finally he relented. And then in the promo for the McCartney album, he writes he's leaving the Beatles, which not only upset Klein and the Beatles and Apple professionally, because they were trying to, they got this huge deal from Capitol and EMI, and it pissed off a lot of Beatles fans, but it especially pissed off John, who was trying to break up the band for about a year and a half, and Paul, among most of people, were telling him to stop. So that put specifically Paul, unfairly, I think, in the crosshair. So yes, to the answer to that part of the question, but I don't think Let It Be is pastiche of Hey Jude. I do think it's younger brother. I know a lot of people feel it's his greatest masterpiece. I don't, but I think it's a great song. He, not coincidentally, again, guys, I hate to be a junior psychiatrist here, but he does mention his mother Mary in it directly. But I think you don't get to Let It Be. It's true. You don't get to Let It Be without Hey Jude. Hey Jude's the first real, I don't want to call it a power ballad, but Paul had been playing around with piano. He started taking piano lessons, by the way, in his 20s. He played when he was a kid, loved the piano. His dad turned him on to it. And he saw his dad get over his grief of his mother's loss by playing the piano. So it's all there. I read about it in the book. But he really was connected to the piano. But it had only been a couple of years, like Fool on the Hill and Lady Madonna, really only a year removed, a couple of months removed for Lady Madonna. But by the time he gets there, he is writing a type of song. But again, Paul McCartney's a craftsman. So anytime he sits down to that piano, there is no way in the world he's not drawn. The Beatles did it all the time. They're drawn. Chuck Berry, Mozart, Beethoven, the Everly Brothers, Buddy Holly. And, I won't mention them specifically, or you don't have to get into the deep woods, but a couple of musicologists pointed out to me, and I went on a detective hunt, and Paul uses two types of music, specific melodies he draws from in Hey Jude. One is a liturgical piece from the early 20th century, and the other one is one from the 50s where they're drawn from a doo-wop background in which Paul was completely in love with. In fact, the very first song Paul ever wrote was, the very first record Paul ever purchased was the Del Vikings, Come Go With Me. So he loved that stuff, and it's all in Hey Jude. So anytime Paul went down to write a song, he was drawing, not only from his influences, but from himself, because he was influencing himself. So I guess there isn't a distinctive answer to that, but that is a great question. I personally think both of them are on their own plane, both brilliant songs. I prefer, obviously, I spent a year of my life with Hey Jude. I think Hey Jude is a more interesting song structurally, and certainly the fact that the coda is longer than the actual song, which is friggin' nuts. I mean, when you break down Let It Be, it's, again, not to get too deeply in the woods, but it's got like a C, A minor, F, C. It's got a general, like if you listen to Bob Marley's No Woman, No Cry, if you listen to, those are the same chord progressions.
With or without you.
With or without you. Right. Or Every Breath You Take. Let It Be is a very structured song, a song that people use the same sort of progression. Hey Jude is a little stranger than that. It draws from a lot. It draws a little gospel. It draws from a little liturgical structure. There is some classical overtones, as Dr. Koch from NC State University told me, a musicologist. So there's a lot of things Paul's using in Hey Jude that he does not use in Let It Be, and it's much more formulaic. That's really what the word I think Andrew was. I think that to give an underline, it's more formulaic than Hey Jude, less experimental.
Yeah, I mean, definitely to plug the book. I thought that was fascinating when you talk about the like ancient hymn aspect of it, this like liturgical hymn, because you talk about how Paul sung in church when he was a little boy, and kind of run down the likelihood that this particular Christian hymn that I certainly wasn't familiar with. We didn't go over that in Hebrew school. How the likelihood that he was exposed to that and that he would have sang it. So now he's writing a song to some extent for this, 5-year-old child who's in distress, and he's subconsciously, presumably, reaching back to the music that he was exposed to at that time in order to, kind of come across. I mean, that adds just a whole nother layer of complexity. And kind of adds to the psychological interpretation of the song. So yeah, not that we have to do any more of it, but yeah, the book really just gets, if you like this kind of conversation and this kind of analysis, when I got it, I was like kind of skeptical, like how can you write an entire book about one song? But there was an endless amount of material, and I wanted to ask, like, how do you approach that? I mean, I wouldn't know how to start writing a whole book about one song. How do you break that down, and what kind of angles did you decide to take? And were there things that you thought you were going to go down, roads you thought you were going to go down that were just kind of dead ends or didn't end up, being as, kind of got cut from the narrative?
Well, I was very, that's a great question. I was very, there was none. The last part of that question about being, and getting some dead ends, I felt like everything was fulfilled for me. And again, 60%, I'm being kind here. It's probably less, but about 60% of the book well, I should say the opposite is 40 or 30% of the book is me writing. 60, 70% is the commentary of all these songwriters from different eras, different ages, different genders, different styles, all the Beatle biographers, music journalists. Michael Lindsay Hogg, obviously, his one-on-one working with Paul specifically and working with the Beatles on Hey Jude, and then all the different professors bringing their voices in. So that was my original idea. What I did do was, as I said to you guys earlier, I read all the books by authors who had tackled one book. I didn't want to do that. I didn't do it to get inspiration, although they were very inspiring, but I did it to not go down the roads they went, which is tough. You know, you're already tackling something that's challenging, but again, you don't want to repeat what other authors have done, even though I've chosen a separate song, a different song. But it was probably the easier road because my last book, Accidentally Like a Martyr, The Tortured Art of Warren Zevon, which not many people, certainly not as many people know the Beatles, know Warren Zevon, but I wrote a series of essays, and each essay was about one song. So I put in like a couple of thousand words per song. That's not, 80,000 word book, but it is enough to give me an idea that you can paint the picture of a life or an artist's structure and thread and process and background if you study their art. Because Crystal Zevon, who told me his ex-wife, told me, if you really want to know about Warren, he goes, people who loved him like we didn't really get to know him. It's almost like the fans knew more about it because he put everything, all his emotions into song, like we were saying before about John and Paul. So that's where you could get to him. So that was always in the back of my mind. Thank you, Crystal. And so I went in and structured it out. And what I discovered about this song is it's got, you mentioned it, David, it's got levels on its writing and its origins and its inspiration, but it also has levels in the sense where the Beatles were in 68, where the world was in 1968, and how that paralleled 2020 and what I was going through and what we all were going through with the pandemic. And, it's the first song the Beatles ever recorded on 8-track. It's the first song they did, in its entirety, specifically outside of Abbey Road. It was the first song released by a label, Apple Records, that it's the most popular one. The length of the song, over 7 minutes to be on AM radio. So many aspects of the song were worth breaking down that once I got going, I couldn't stop. So it was, you always think to yourself, can you just do a book about one song? It's only a 260-page book, so it's not a giant tome by any imagination, but thanks to these people, they gave me so much more information. I'm like, oh, I didn't think of that. Of course it would do that. Then, of course, when Walter Everett, the great musicologist and Beatle author, tells me, I got a guy who discovered the origins of the opening melody through this other thing. Give me his number. Let's chat. Let's put him in the book, So that's the fun of it. Yeah.
Well, do you have enough time to do another hour on Warren Zevon's Mutineer? If you don't have anywhere to go, I've got a lot of opinions.
Sure.
Who is rolling the headless Thompson Gunner? We want to know.
One quick thing about Mutineer, I actually like the live versions of the songs on that record better than the recorded version, because I actually saw Warren, tour solo for that record, and he played like 3 or 4 songs. When I got the record, I didn't like it as much. That's my only comment about what is that your favorite Zevon record?
No, probably not, but it's up there, and I it's just such an odd little album that I have a real soft spot for it.
Me too.
Well, we eventually we want to get to the Warren Zevon documentary, so we may need to call you back for that one.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's funny you guys say that. There is several in the works, and one of them I was about to be hired as a story consultant, but there is a lot of legal wrangling to get the songs and the productions. The Zevon world was great to dive into, but it was also very difficult. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of family members. There's a lot of people, co-writers, the Jackson Browns, the Bruce Springsteens, the, all that stuff. So it was it's tough to get a documentary off the ground, but I'm actually in one of them. And the other one it might be up and running soon. So I guess whoever gets to the finish line first, but I'll make sure those guys get on your show.
We love it. Awesome. Any future projects? Are you going to write about why don't we do it in the road, or maybe he's got some of the highlights of my monkey, or
You know what? Screw you guys. If you expanded, listen. By the way, I'm done. I'm Punctious Pilate. If I could use a Christian, lore, I've Punctious Pilate this thing as one song. I'm not washing my hands of the idea. It's funny you mentioned, why don't you do it on the road? Let's do a 3,000 word. I may just do it as a challenge. The song title is all the lyrics and everything. Go.
I love it.
Good luck to you. Yeah, I am doing another project, guys. But I'm not at liberty to say. I'm not trying to throw up some, ooh, wow, nobody cares what I'm doing. It's just that I haven't, gotten the people together yet who are going to be in the book, if it's going to be a book. And some of again, getting back to the legal aspects of when you put a book together, you have to have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. But I have begun it. A lot of times I'll start before I pitch it to the publisher, because I'm trying to convince myself that it's worthy enough angle or project. So I'm in that part of it right now. And I'm also writing a book with Adam Duritz from County Crows, which is taking way longer than I thought it would, because, he's a songwriter and a rock star, and he doesn't care about making deadlines or finishing chapters with me. So it's been a slow process, but it has been a brilliant one. And I've engaged we've had a great friendship. We did podcasts of our own for a couple of years. We hope to get back to it. So I hope to finish that book someday. But thanks for asking, David.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there is a lot of Adam Duritz quotes in the Hey Jude books, and now that explains why he was accessible.
Yes. Yeah. He demanded. He's like, oh, hey, I must speak about it. In fact, I first told him and the rest of the guys in the band when they were recording their last record, I actually visited them in Brooklyn, and this was March 12th, 2020, the day they started shutting down all the airports in New York. And you want to see how fast musicians can pack their shit up and run for the door to get the heck out of New York City. That was a real show. That was, yes, I was very lucky to get a lot of the songwriters and, like I said, all the people who contributed to the project. I'm always fortunate, and I thank them all for putting their 2 cents in. Hey, can I ask you guys a question before you jettison me?
Yes.
Sure.
Unless you have any more questions. It looked like you were wrapping up, so I didn't.
I think, yeah, fire away. Turn the
okay,
tables
so
on.
so I just want to know you might have said it already in these shows, so people who are diehard listeners might know, but your favorite rock docs and your favorite Beatle one. And now it has to be a documentary. It could it be like one of those biopic docs, like Nowhere Boy or that kind of thing. Could it be that? I mean, how far do you guys? What's your parameters here?
But you mean like the Queen one or what, or Rocket Man? Or
those are biopics, right?
We're on record as hating biopics, and biopics are our enemy. So
okay, is there no biopic? Actually, Adam's one who used to always say all biopics are terrible because they always make them about like the artist being hit by lightning or possessed by an Indian. They're never just like, hey, I really like this song, I'm going to write it. Yeah.
I mean,
100%.
I like Backbeat.
You're speaking our language, James.
But
I like the Selena biopic. I'm on record. I think the Selena biopic's really good.
Oh, he goes rare. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so enough of this. What is your favorite rock docs?
Andy, should we say this together?
Yeah, we should say this together.
All right.
You're the second guest who's asked exactly this question at exactly this moment in the recording.
One, two, three.
History of the
Eagles.
Wow.
Have you seen that, James?
Yes, I have. It's excellent. Excellent. Yeah. I'm not one of the Eagle haters. I'm not. And as you know, Don Henley and Glenn Fry and Joe Walsh were also all very, very close to Warren. I almost got Don for the book. I know that Warren was not particularly nice to Don towards the end of his life, so I don't know if Don Henley was in the mood to talk about Warren Zevon. But yes, I'm a fan of the Eagles. I thought for sure you guys were going to say The Last Waltz. I don't know why. That's my favorite.
Well, we argue about whether that's a documentary or a concert film, so that's an issue.
It has enough interviews for a documentary. But you know what Scorsese did there? He's always been an influence of mine. He kind of did what I did with Warren Zevon. He took the song. It's almost like the history of American music. Yeah. In that film.
That's right.
Even though I know Van Morrison's in there, but you know what I mean? It goes the full. Okay, he's not buying it. I'm looking at David right now. I got to shoulder shrug.
No, I'm buying it. I like it.
I'm stretching the credibility. I know I'm stretching the credibility.
No, I'm with you. I think he fully does, and I think the interviews that they do have are pretty sparse, but I think together with the music, based on what you're talking about, it tells the story of the band, because it's the band also, sort
It's
of
like their
weaves
memoir.
together.
Yeah.
Exactly. It weaves together. They weave together the story of American music as well. So yeah, if The Last Waltz counts as a rock doc, which we've debated whether it's a concert film,
And a hearty debate. That makes
Yes.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So like Stop Making Sense is comfortably a concert film.
Absolutely.
I think I would say
it's not a documentary.
not documentary at all. Last Waltz, I think, sits just on the edge of the documentary side of things. But
yes, right.
I just think
I
just think History of the Eagles. I'm not a hater either, but I'm not a huge fan by any stretch of the imagination. But the movie, the craft of telling their story, and like treating it almost with like a Ken Burnsian seriousness is so winning to me. In fact, I watched the first part on Saturday again for the 160th time.
And there's a palpable tension in those interviews. Yeah. It's amazing that most times these rock docs you interview these guys in their 60s and 70s, and they're like, we were just crazy on coke, and Clem Fry's like, that guy should not get paid if he doesn't show. It's like, dude,
Don Henley exclusively refers to Don Felder as Mr. Felder throughout the entire movie. It's like it's a deposition.
That's so true. Well said. All right, so your favorite Beatles doc?
It's Get Back for me. I thought Get Back was.
Duh. So before Get Back came out, that's gonna breaks the mold for sure.
It does break.
Is there one in there? You know what I thought was really brilliant? I don't know if you guys remember this. First time I heard Real Love was Imagine, the 1988 film they did about John when Sean was really young still.
Yeah.
And Cynthia. And that's a really great. Most of the problem with John is that he was so deified after his death, which also is the reason I talked about the emotional currency, if I may, of Hey Jude, my subtitle. Paul lived, and for a while, Paul being alive was not a good thing for him.
Bad career move.
It's a bad career move. You know what I mean? And his canon is so vast. It's hard. You could put the George Harrison, well, specifically the John Lennon, but George didn't do much either. I mean, he had some comebacks here or there, Cloud9, but it's hard to encapsulate Paul. But the fact that he has gone on and continues to perform and is touring as I talk to you guys, and he still plays Hey Jude, and everywhere he plays, everybody sings, and I don't care. I am a sucker for that. I saw him at Madison Square Garden in '89, and I had to hold back the tears. It's a different experience, man. So most of those films really deify John, but I thought Imagine was kind of cool in the sense where it talked about like John cheating on Yoko and then getting kicked out and running like amok in LA, and how difficult balancing his political beliefs with his artistic ideas and his drug abuse. It's all in that film. So I think that was the most honest of any Beatle-related doc. That's mine. Anyway.
I would say, so Anthology, when it came out, I was like 12 years old. And so that's sort of responsible for a lot of my... That's sort of my...
Don't look at me.
He's older than me. But that's like responsible for a lot of my understanding of the Beatles. And so I have like pretty strong memories of watching that for the first time.
Yeah,
David,
I haven't seen Imagine again. Last time I saw Imagine, I think I rented it on VHS from Blockbuster. I just haven't had a chance to go back to it or haven't.
It's nowhere. That's why I think it's kind of been buried, because it doesn't deify John. Most of these things, make John out to be, and that's why I loved researching this book too. John's pains, John's mercurial, and that's a nice word, mood swings that Cynthia and Paul both had to put up with. He understood. They both loved John, loved him, but they couldn't fathom the man. And so, I think when someone dies, they tend to whitewash a lot of that stuff, and you get that a lot with John. Yeah.
But I would say, probably my favorite other than Get Back is Living in the Material World, the Martin Scorsese, George Harrison documentary.
Yes.
It's which is also, a deification of a recently deceased person, but that it's also pretty warts and all. And, like you said, Scorsese, when he gets down to doing a documentary, it's hard to beat that. I mean, he just knocks him out of the park.
And if I may say go ahead, Andrew, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to your point about Paul being alive had been bad for Paul's career for a while. I do think the last couple of years have started to shift things. Like there's a real reappreciation of Ram going on. Like everywhere I turn, people are like all about Ram right now.
And they should be. And I've said this on every podcast I've been on, and I'm going to say it one more time, even though this has nothing to do with Paul McCartney or anything like that, this podcast. I loved Ram the first time I heard it, which would have been like, I'm going to guess 79, 80, 81. I was in high school, just first year of college. And that album was just crapped on everywhere you read in the Rolling Stone record guide review. And I think a lot of it had to do with Paul breaking up the Beatles. I'm air quoting for those of you not seeing us here. And I don't know how you listen to that record and say it stinks. I can understand you'd be like, well, it's not the Beatles. It's not Hey Jude. It's not Sgt. Yeah, okay, I get that. But they're not together anymore. The thing is a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece. And the other thing, too, is Linda got such crap for dragging him down and not being a real musician and all this misogyny that she got in the early 70s. And I know he tutored her, but who's a better tutor? She sings her ass off on that record. It's just their harmonies are gorgeous. I'm glad you mentioned that, Andrew. Thank you. And that's my diatribe for the moment.
I love it. But okay.
You have to wrap up. But last thing about Get Back, if I could. I swear.
Plenty of time for Get Back.
So isn't it really cool how in that film, every Beatle gets his personality moment? That's all I'll say. There's a million of them, but you know what I mean? You get to see the old adage about, are you a George person? Are you a Ringo person? Is your personality more John and George? You see it in that film, and there's no masking. There's no artifice. It's straight John, Paul, Ringo, George.
Yes. We said on the show when we watched it the first time that, you know, there's a sort of like horoscope aspect to identifying which Beatle is your favorite, that it marks your personality in some specific way, whether you want the world to see you as a John person or a Ringo person or whatever. And I don't know what it says about me, but after that movie, I'm squarely an all four person. I can't choose. I can't choose. I don't know.
You're the Beatles
Mission
guy.
accomplished. Mission accomplished there, Mr. Jackson. Guys, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Okay, so the book is Take a Sad Song, The Emotional Currency of Hey Jude. James, where can people find you, follow up with you, etc., all that good stuff?
I might have, if you want to order the book and get a signed copy, I'll send it to you if you live in the continental United States, free shipping. You go to jamescampion.com. Otherwise, it's available June 1st everywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the stuff. You can follow me at Fear No Art at Twitter and at James Campion on Instagram. We also have a Facebook page, the Hey Jude book Facebook page. A lot of cool content on there. And check all those places and my website for my book events, where I'll be at. I'm going to try to travel all across the country and go to different bookstores and good areas. I'm trying to do a lot of book events with some of the professors that were in the book to give them a little limelight. They deserve it. Some of the songwriters said they might show up to a couple of my my book signings and maybe play Hey Jude or sing a song. So that'd be kind of fun. So thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
Love it. Okay. James, thanks for doing this. And we are at Rock Docs Pod for people who are following us, et cetera, rate, review, all that good stuff. And thanks for listening to Rock Docs, folks.